You just explained why probably my favorite side hustle for PAs, genuinely, because you're getting paid 3 to 5 times the hourly rate that you would earn like if you just went and worked a clinical hour. And the vast majority of it can be done at home. And so like if you're figuring out childcare, or if you're just kind of like burnt out from being at the hospital or the clinic all the time, the idea of being able to use that skill set in your house, on your couch with your slippers on and your favorite cappuccino, it's like, that's really nice. Thanks for joining us. For this episode, we have with us Susan Ferrero. She is a PA with 20 years of experience in a whole bunch of different clinical stuff, ranging from emergency medicine to orthopedics and more. Even more interesting than that, she has transitioned into this really interesting space of medical legal medicine. And she's actually founded Ferrero Medical Consulting and now is a full-time medical legal consultant. And so we're going to talk with her about how PAs can enter this space of medical legal medicine, even maybe not full time, but as a side hustle or some extra, non-clinical work, and maybe even talk about what it looks like to transition into this space full time if that's something that you're interested in. So thanks for joining us, Susan. I'm excited to talk about all this jazz today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So before we kind of get into the logistics of what it can look like to be an expert witness or do some of this stuff on the side, how in the world did you get into this space?
Probably like most PAs, you reach a point where you start to look for something that's a little less, 9 to 5 hustle and something you can do at home. And I was actually looking to get out of clinical medicine completely and to see what kind of a position that would look like. And I came across legal nurse consultants. I knew because a long time ago, I encountered an attorney who told me that they hired medical professionals sometimes to review medical cases and help them understand kind of what was going on. So I knew that was something that occurred. I just didn't really know how to go about it, how it took place. So I researched PAs in legal medicine, and I really couldn't find much about how to get started in the sense that I wanted to, because I wanted to be able to leave clinical medicine completely and have it be my full-time job. And so I learned about what the nurses were doing, and I basically just started my own company of doing that. And for the most part, I do expert witness work, but most of what I do is behind the scenes, reviewing cases and all sorts of things for attorneys.
That is incredible. Not a lot of medical professionals would have like the gusto to look into a space and go, I'd like to be in there. There's really no framework for how it could be done, and then just make their own framework.
Yeah. If you can't find the path, then you have to build the path.
Yep. I think that's true for the PA profession in so many different ways, but it's really cool to see PAs like forging literally new paths of what is possible for the rest of us, right? If this is an avenue that we want to take as well. So let's do super big picture, because some people might not even know what the heck an expert witness is or what we're even really talking about. So what does it mean to do expert witness work?
So when something happens in medicine, the outcomes aren't always great. There can be a bad outcome that happens. And sometimes family or the patient will question, was the care that I received appropriate? Or was there something that happened, a mistake that was made that caused the bad outcome? And we know in medicine that sometimes they're just bad outcomes, but we also know that sometimes there are mistakes made. And when a mistake is made that really affects a person's life or takes a person's life, those things should be looked into if there's a question about it. So someone will go to a malpractice attorney and tell them the story. And if a malpractice attorney thinks that it has a little bit of merit, they will then further investigate it. That means they'll get the medical records, they'll review them. If they think that it might be a case, then they will have someone review it. And in most states, attorneys need a medical professional that says, yes, this is negligent. That prevents, or is supposed to prevent, frivolous lawsuits. So you have an expert that comes along and says, yes, this looks like the provider was negligent. And in the expert witness world, for the most part, they need a match. So if it's a nurse that was negligent, it needs to be a nurse that's reviewing it, right? Because they know the standard of care of a nurse.
Right.
Same thing with a physician. For PAs, we're kind of that weird in-between spot always, right? For many years, and still in some situations, in some states, and I'll say this right off the bat, is every state is different, just like it is with PA practice. The laws in every state are different, so it will vary by state. In some states, physicians were just speaking to the care of a PA, and now there's more and more PAs speaking to the care of PAs, and that's how it should be, right? We know our standard of care, and despite the fact that the standard of care is the standard of care across medicine, right? I mean, you're not practicing any differently than a physician would be expected to be, but you know what a PA is, you know a PA's role, you know your education, so it makes more sense that a PA is an expert for a PA case. So if an attorney comes to you and says, this is something I'd like you to review, we think there might be negligence, you review a record and you basically put yourself in that PA's position and you say, given what I know, right, what they knew at that moment, does it look like the standard of care was met? And if not, then, and there was negligence, then you may be able to support that case. And in a defense case, they might come and say, we think the PA did everything right, and we need you to review this and see what you think. And you may look at it and say, yeah, they did or they didn't, and you can support their narrative or you can't support their narrative.
Yeah, I think this is actually a really interesting, I'll call it like side hustle, because it like is a pairing of real genuine clinical expertise, but in a non-clinical way. Mm-hmm. And so it's nice, I think, to be able to find something that you can do that leverages the clinical skills and experiences you've built, but in something that, like you had mentioned, maybe case review from home or doing something different than like working an additional shift. That brings me to like a good question, I guess, is how do they define like who is an expert witness? Can you have been a PA in that field for 6 months? Does it have to be 6 years? Do you have to have been in the same field as the case? Like, how does that work?
There's no real definition per se of what an expert is, but if you're holding yourself out to be an expert, you really should know what you're talking about. And again, I will say it varies by state. So if you've been a PA for 5 years and you were in emergency medicine for a year, and then you did pediatrics for a year, and then you went to urgent care for 6 months, now you're in orthopedic surgery, you're an expert in PA practice, but it's hard to say you're an expert in that particular specialty. So you generally want to have 5 years experience as a PA and at least 5 years experience in that specialty. Now, there are caveats to everything, right? And sure, maybe you've been a rheumatology PA for 3 years and they can't find a rheumatology PA expert and you know what you're talking about and you can handle the case, then that might happen. But I would say at least 5 years is generally it. And you want to have been in that specialty and know that specialty, because they're going to be looking for someone. If it's an ER PA, they are going to want an ER PA. If it's a cardiology PA, they're going to want a cardiology PA. Somebody that matches, just like they do with physicians. We have a little more wiggle room because we are the only profession that goes from specialty to specialty. So you can practice for 5 years in orthopedic surgery and then practice for 5 years in emergency medicine. You probably have a pretty good understanding of orthopedics that you could be an expert potentially. To be an expert, you should have experience in that specific specialty for a good amount of time.
Yeah, I think you obviously know more than I do, but I've done a little bit of this, and when I have talked to law firms, it seems like their specific criteria varies a little bit, but it is pretty consistent. It seems that they want you to have been practicing in the arena of medicine that the case is within at the time the case occurred. Mm-hmm. Which I thought was interesting. And then, as you mentioned, like have a decent number of years of experience in that area as well. Have you seen a requirement for like, do you need to be full-time? Can you be part-time? Something like that?
It really, I think, varies by the attorney. Some states do have specific guidelines and it says you have to be practicing. I mean, some states, in the state of Kentucky, you have to practice in a state that touches Kentucky. Weird, right? But you have to practice, for the most part, usually they want you practicing at that time period, because then you actually know the standard of care 2023 that this occurred, as opposed to, well, I started in 2025. The defense or the plaintiff, whoever the opposing side, is going to try to discredit you no matter what you say. So they like to stack it off the bat with, this is a person who practiced this specialty at this time, was basically the exact same match for this person. So it varies by the attorney. Some attorneys don't, they want all the bells and whistles. Some attorneys, they don't care. I mean, you practice, some states, if you've practiced in the last 5 years, it's okay. As long as you've practiced in the last 5 years, they're fine with that. So it varies. There's a lot of variability. I think you'll find an attorney that will take you, and then you'll find an attorney that would say no.
Right. That's interesting. I think it's helpful because you might reach out to someone or become aware of a case and then be told hey, you're not a good candidate and here's why, but that doesn't necessarily mean you would be ruled out across the board. And so it's nice to know you can maybe continue down that path and build connections and see that may not be an across the board no or yes. There might be some variability there.
Right. And an attorney might not be this attorney, but their partner might say, I don't care. I mean, it even varies by firm. Yeah, you might have one attorney say you're not a good fit for this case, but if you asked another attorney that had the exact same case, they would be fine with it. So yeah, if you hear no as an expert, that doesn't mean you don't fit the expert role. Someone might say, you know what, you have 5 years experience. We prefer someone with more experience. I find that there's a lot more leeway. I help attorneys find experts a lot of the time, and I find there's a lot more leeway with PAs and what they'll accept than with physicians a lot of the time. There is variability with physicians as well as experts, but I find that PA experts are not as common as medical doctor experts. So if they're looking for someone and they need them to fit a certain criteria, they're much looser about it, because some don't want an East Coast. If it's California, they don't want an East Coast person, and they want someone that's closer, and for a variety of reasons. And sometimes it is simply just, we don't want to have to pay to have you travel out here. You know, they try to keep their expenses pretty low.
Yeah, I could see that. I do want to talk about, like, how do you actually get started? What are the steps you take? But before we talk about that, let's explain, like, why this is an exciting opportunity. What type of compensation range are we looking at realistically if you decided to be, like, very focused on this avenue of, like, I'm going to build my repertoire here, I'm going to lean into this arena? What type of annual revenue or annual income, I guess I should say, can you look at for this? And, like, give the context of why this is potentially an exciting opportunity.
Yeah, so like with a lot of side hustles, I should say, there's variability, right? I mean, you have to get the cases in order to get the money, right? So if you take a couple cases a year, then that's going to obviously not be as much as if you're taking more. It's not something really that you can do as a full-time job. One, because you really need to be practicing clinically. And two, the more cases you get, because you're going to be asked in deposition and in trial, how many cases are you working on? How many cases have you worked on? They will ask you how much money you make off of this. So they will try to make it seem like this is a moneymaker for you. But that being said, what you're compensated as an expert is like 5 times sometimes of what you're making as a PA practicing per hour. So we don't really say like, okay, it's this, you can make $300 an hour or $400 an hour. There's no set price. You set your own price and you base it off of your experience. It's not based off really of your location. So that's good because you can be working for attorneys across the country. But you have to be careful not to price yourself out of the market. But you also want to not price yourself too low, because then it's funny the way it works, right? If you are the cheapest, they don't want you, right? You hire a contractor, you get 3 quotes. You don't go with the lowest one usually. You try to go with the middle one because you wonder why the lowest one is the lowest one. But the general, if you say like an emergency medicine physician charges on average around $500 an hour. So you would likely want to come a little under that. You can charge anywhere between, PAs charge usually between $250 and $500, I think is an appropriate number. Now, if you're in a really like specialized area like pediatric cardiology, you can charge more because there's not going to be as much competition. And it's kind of the same what physicians do. Physicians are charging on average for like an ER physician around $500. But a neurosurgeon charges at least $1,000 an hour. As a neurosurgery PA, you're not going to be charging $1,000 an hour, but right. You can probably be a little bit closer to a little bit above 5 potentially. So you don't want to price yourself out of the market, but you want to make sure you're pricing yourself well. So I'd say probably, anywhere between $300 if you're starting out up to $500, maybe $600. But you will get pushback. Sometimes attorneys will say, you're charging me more or you're charging me the same as the physician. So that makes sense.
So let me ask you this. What percentage of the work would you say ends up being at home versus like in person in trial or something like that?
Yeah, so most cases don't go to trial. Most malpractice cases, most civil cases in general don't go to trial. They either settle before or, sometimes they get thrown out as they go along, but most of them don't go to trial. You can talk to experts, and a lot of them, I've never been to trial. A lot of experts I know have never been to trial because it's never gotten that far. You're more likely to have a deposition. And now in the days since COVID and this beautiful Zoom, a lot of depositions are Zoom. So you don't even have to leave your house for a deposition. Some people, they want it in person, attorneys want it in person, and that's fine. But you're paid to travel to wherever it is. They usually will come to you and then, it's set up at that office or something. But if you have to travel, it's something that you get compensated for. So I'd say the majority of the work is you reviewing records. If you do your deposition at home, you may never leave the house.
Yeah, you just explained explained why this is probably my favorite side hustle for PAs, genuinely, because you're getting paid 3 to 5 times the hourly rate that you would earn like if you just went and worked a clinical hour. And the vast majority of it can be done at home. And so like if you're figuring out childcare, or if you're just kind of like burnt out from being at the hospital or the clinic all the time, the idea of being able to use that skill set in your house, on your couch with your slippers on and your favorite cappuccino, it's like, that's really nice. And so for people who are thinking like, this is a great example. I'm a PA, I've worked for a decade, but I work at a major academic medical center, and I'm finding it really hard to negotiate substantial raises. Okay, this is a great avenue to say, I'm seasoned, I'm experienced, I have the skill set, I can leverage it another way and make as much or as little as you want, right? Like you mentioned, you could take a couple of cases a year. I know some folks pulling in 6 figures doing this type of work. And so there's a big spectrum of like how much you could earn depending on how much you want to do. But it is a great option for people who are focused, as I am, on like the time per dollar output ratio.
Yeah.
Right. I think anybody who has a busy life, like, you know, I work clinically and have kids and all sorts of stuff. I'm always thinking about like, how can I get the most juice for my hour spent? And this is a great opportunity for that.
Yeah. No, and it's, you can fit it in when you have time, right? It's not like I have to sit down between 9 and 12 and work on this. Or, I mean, you know, if you have an appointment that you, with an attorney to have a call, like you schedule it when they understand like you work, and they understand that in the medical world, that means that you're working crazy hours, or you're working, you know, you can't leave, right? You can't, if you're in surgery, you can't schedule a call in the middle of the day. So they understand that and work around your schedule. You can get home from your clinical job, have dinner, put your kids to bed, and then work on a case for a couple hours in the evening. And then Saturday, maybe your husband takes the kids to the park and you've got a few hours and you work on it then. You make the hours and you work on it at your own leisure.
That part is really nice. I mean, really, that's probably the best part. I also think like simultaneously, it is one of the hardest things to get into, because they think for most PAs, there's like no defined path of, okay, I am a clinician with, you know, multiple years of experience. I'm interested, but then like, what do I do next? How do I get connected in this world?
Yeah. It's like any other side hustle. It's like any other business you start, you have to market. You have to sell yourself and you have to market. You can't sit on your couch and say like, okay, here I am. I'm an expert witness, you know, PA expert witness, and I'm ready. It's like dating, right? You have to put yourself out there. You can't stay home. No one's going to knock on your door and say, hi, I'm here to take you out for a date, if they don't know that you're there. So you have to let them know that you exist and get yourself in front of them. And I mean, LinkedIn is wonderful. There are a lot of attorneys on LinkedIn. People are constantly, you know, posting things on there about expert witness stuff. So make sure you have a really good LinkedIn profile that says what you do. Make it very clear. If someone has to dig through something to figure out who you are or what you do, they're moving on. So make sure that you have a good LinkedIn profile. That's the easiest, cheapest, free way to put yourself out there. I'm a PA. I've been a PA for 20 years. I practice in emergency medicine. I do expert witness work. I'm an experienced expert. I've done, this many cases or what have you. And even if you haven't, it's still okay to put that out there and just say, I'm an expert, and you don't have to say I've never done a case, but I'm here. I think the misunderstanding a lot of times is, I see people out there that are doing this and they're experts and we're in the same field. And I say emergency medicine because it's saturated. It's also one of the highest specialties that gets sued. So, emergency medicine, yes, there are a ton of us that are out there that do expert work in emergency medicine. And you might think, well, these guys have so much more experience in doing this and I have no experience. But that doesn't matter because I might not fit what that exact attorney is looking for. He might be looking for someone in New England that is practicing in New England and works at a small rural hospital because that's where their event occurred and they want to match it better, or they want someone who matches the PA better. So a lot of people think, I don't have the experience, I don't have the credentials. You don't need to have a doctorate. You don't need to have a teaching experience. You don't need to have all of this stuff, because if you're a match for that case over someone else, they're going to take you. And a lot of attorneys are open into having someone without experience. So don't let that discourage you if that's the case. Everyone starts somewhere and they realize that.
I also think it's really helpful to recognize, because most PAs, like myself included, I don't have an in-depth knowledge of the legal world, right? And so there's this fear of like terminology is confusing and I don't know the normal like sequence of events, but they're not looking for someone with legal experience. They're the attorney. They're looking for someone with clinical knowledge. And so even though we feel kind of like dumb in a way, like going into this because we just don't know the legal stuff, like that's not why they're reaching out to you. So I think it's important to recognize like you have the expertise in the thing that matters, even if the whole world of legal medicine is totally foreign.
100%. Yeah. They're not expecting you to understand the law. If you have a little understanding and you pick it up as you go along, it's helpful. But attorneys are known for just randomly reaching out. They have a case and they will literally Google physician assistant that, works in pediatrics, expert witness. And if something comes up, and it doesn't even say expert witness, but I mean, there have been so many PAs that are like, oh, I was the medical director or the PA education director at whatever university. And someone just reached out to me and called and said, I Googled you and your name came up. And they have you ever been an expert witness? No. Okay. Well, can you review this case? Okay. They're going to walk you through what you need to know, and they're going to help you with that terminology part of it. You're not expected, like you said, to know the legal aspect of it because you're not practicing law. You're not doing anything. You are literally there to review the medicine and explain the medicine and determine if what happened met the standard of care. That's really all it is.
Yeah, honestly, I genuinely think it's kind of fun. It's almost like solving a little puzzle. Like, at least I'm on the inpatient side. So like reviewing a case is like all of the inpatient notes and the nursing documentation and the flow sheets and all of that stuff. So you're piecing it all together like a fun little puzzle, but it's also the arena that you hopefully love, right? As you work in and like spend all of your time trying to excel in clinically. So it's like a fun little game almost. Piecing together the medical record and what happened and like literally imagining yourself in the situation.
Yeah, no, it is that you hit the nail on the head. It is like a puzzle because you're not there, right? You're getting these records and you have to try to piece together what happened. And the interesting part, and probably the hardest part, I think, it's like, here's a book, Kristen, read this book, but this is how it ends. So you know the ending and you have to try to read the book and forget about the ending and see if you would have done anything differently, not knowing how the story ends. So yeah, you have to put yourself in that person's position. The best experts, I think, are able to objectively put themselves in that person's shoes at that exact moment, look at the facts and determine, would I have done something differently? And again, we can talk about how it's not necessarily what you would do, but it's really about what the standard of care is defined as what someone, a reasonable provider, equal provider would do in that situation. So yeah, you have to put yourself in there and say, was this reasonable?
I think at this point, probably most people listening are like, I'm kind of excited about this opportunity. This sounds cool. But I do think LinkedIn is a great way to get started, but it can be very slow, like making these connections. Yeah. And there are a lot of sites that you can like Google that will be like forums or platforms for you to post yourself as an expert witness, some of which is a paid promotion where like you pay to be on their site. Walk us through that process. Is that a good decision when you're just getting started in this, or are there like downstream ramifications of going that way?
Yeah, so there are websites that you can go on. Seek is a big one. I mean, that's probably the most popular and well-known, which is SEAK. They train expert witnesses and they have an open expert witness directory. So an attorney can go on Seek, punch in cardiology PA, and come up with people who are experts. So it's kind of 50-50. Some attorneys absolutely do not want someone that is advertising. And other attorneys don't care. They'll actually go on Seek and find you. And this question comes up all the time. Should I advertise or shouldn't I advertise? And, am I going to get more cases, or are attorneys going to be repelled by that? And it really varies. There are attorneys that just don't, they go on Seek and they find someone, or they go on Expert Institute, or they go on something and they care if you are advertising. You have a website, they don't care. Other attorneys, they don't want there to be a trace of you. And the reason is the opposing side is going to use that to try to discredit you. So essentially, A civil suit is an event happens and both sides have a narrative, and one side describes the story one way, one just describes it the other way. They're both going to get experts to back up their story. And those experts, then the opposite side will then try to discredit the other expert. So that's part of their job, is to basically discredit you. And part of that involves personal stuff, right? So if they Google you and you have some contentious divorce where it says that you haven't paid child support and your ex-wife is taking you to court, multiple times over it, that will probably come up if they find that easily on Google, because they want to make it seem like you're not a great person, you're not a good expert. That's why they ask you how much money you make off of this. They'll ask you what your hourly rate is. They'll ask you, all of these things, because they're trying to discredit you. And does it have anything to do with the medicine? No, not at all. It has nothing to do with your opinion or the medicine or the case, but it's all about trying to discredit you. So some attorneys, they just want to avoid that, right? So they don't want to hire somebody that has that and then have to listen to it in a deposition and say, well, you are listed on Seek, and how much money have you made, and how many cases do you get, and how many, and all this kind of stuff. They just avoid that. So you can advertise. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with going on Seek or any of the other advertising forums. Just know that will come up in your deposition most likely, and know that there are some attorneys that will not hire you because of that, but there are plenty that will. Sometimes I think it might be helpful if you're starting out, maybe to get yourself out there. You don't have to stay on there forever. You get on there maybe a year or two, maybe once you start getting cases and people start kind of knowing who you are, then you can go off of there. The bottom line is attorneys advertise, so there's nothing wrong with advertising. Just know that it's something that you're going to have to discuss.
Okay, that's helpful context. So if you decided not to go that route, is it weird to cold email firms or cold message firms on LinkedIn if you want to do something more active than just optimizing your profile?
Yeah, I think that, cold email, everyone says they hate cold emailing, but I do it all the time and I've gotten lots of business that way. So there's nothing wrong with cold emailing. It's all about how you're doing it, right? So if you're coming across as, a used car salesman, it's not going to work well. Mm-hmm. But like I mentioned before, attorneys are always telling me that they have a hard time finding PA experts. So if you are a PA and you want to be, you write out a short little email that says, this is who I am, kind of, again, they're not going to read through paragraphs. It's got to be short, very straight to the point. You can either say, I'm a PA expert. I do in orthopedic surgery, and I've been a PA for 13 years in orthopedic surgery, and I'm an expert witness. I just wanted to introduce myself, and here is my CV. If I can ever be of service in reviewing cases, please let me know. You may never hear from them. They may not respond back to you. Sometimes they'll write back and say, hey, thanks for, whatever, I'll hold on to this. You might not hear anything. You might just be like, all right, whatever. And then a year later, 3 years later, you get a call, because what they do is they take that and they file it. They give it to their paralegal, or they put it in whatever file they have of experts. And then when they're looking for an orthopedic PA, your name comes up and they reach out to you and say, oh, hey, we have a case. So, and a lot of times people get cases and they say, well, how did you get my name? And they can't even remember because they just got it from whoever. So cold calling is not frowned upon. I think it's a good way to get yourself out there. Here's my CV. If I can ever be of service, this is who I am. And don't be discouraged by crickets, because it doesn't mean they're throwing it out or deleting it. It means that they're probably putting it in their file and you might hear about it.
That's honestly really helpful. And I think it's good context too, because a lot of new PAs, I think, have a general lack of awareness of how important it is to have a really strong CV and a really strong LinkedIn profile. And a lot of times, we will review people's CVs who are inside of our coaching program, and a lot of them are really weak, honestly. And it's whoa, if you're going to go ahead and cold email people and say, hey, here I am, consider me for this work, that is your only foot forward. That is your first impression, is your CV.
Exactly.
And so before you do any of this stuff, I think taking a strong moment to walk through your LinkedIn, make sure it's optimized, walk through your CV, even get some mentorship in that arena if you need help. And then make sure before you go out and you do all these intros that you're introducing yourself well. It's kind of the equivalent of showing up to an interview in sweatsuits. you don't
No,
really look that professional, you know?
Yeah, you want to make sure you're putting your best foot forward and your best version of yourself. And that really is, these days just on a piece of paper or on a social media platform, right? If you send an email to somebody with a CV, they may look at you on LinkedIn. They might be like, who's this person? If they pull it up and there's no profile, then it's like, okay. But if there's a profile with a picture, and we don't have to get into all the how to optimize your LinkedIn, but it's like, if there's a picture and they can put a face to the name and they can read that you have the experience that you say and what you do, then it's helpful. So yeah, I mean, having a strong CV and it doesn't have to be crazy. That's the other thing, is you don't really need to send. I see physicians that, their CVs are like 20 pages long. I'm like, I don't know. I know most of the attorneys are not reading through those. If you don't need to put every single presentation you've ever given. You don't need to give every single paper you've ever written if it's a lot. If you've written a few papers and they've been published, then put that in there. It shows that you're published. If you have some speaking engagements, that's fine. You don't need to put every little thing that you've done in there because it's too much, right? They want to be able to go through it quickly. They want to see that you have the experience in that specialty, and they want to see that you have the education that you need as a PA. That's really how simple it is.
Yeah, I think honestly, like if this is something that you want to do, it is as simple as taking 2 hours, optimize your LinkedIn, optimize your CV, even think about like, I have 4 different versions of my CV, depending on what I'm using it for. Like if I'm using it for a clinical thing versus a non-clinical thing, and then highlighting the skills that associate. So if you have to like make a separate CV for this, and then like go cold email a bunch of people. I'm so glad that you said that. It's not weird because I've 1,000% done that too. And
that's weird. How I've gotten most of my work. A lot of what I do, like I said, is I review cases, not just PA cases and not just as experts. I review every case for every specialty for any provider. So sometimes I'm reviewing cases about, a nurse made a mistake, or I'm reviewing a surgery that went bad, or anything. Any specialty. Yeah. And because as a PA, we're trained as generalists. We're trained in all of these specialties. And I have a pretty wide background. So I'm like, all right, I feel comfortable with that. I come across things all the time. I have no idea what they are, but I research them. That's what we do, right? So I research them, and I've learned so much about so many different things that I didn't know about. Like yesterday, I did a bunch of research about PEG tubes, which I knew a little bit about, but not much, but now I know a lot more. Even if you're not an expert witness, there is an opportunity to do this. And a lot of times you'll find you're an expert on a case and an attorney likes you and you did a good job. And he might reach out to you and say, hey, I have this case, could you review? There's not a PA involved, but this general surgeon, I'm not sure if something went wrong during the surgery because there was a bad outcome. And you review it, and you're not the expert on that case. If it goes forward, they will find a general surgery expert or whoever, but you have the capability to do that.
I didn't know that. So you almost do like a prelim review for them to say, hey, it's worth your time to go hunt down an expert in this arena.
Exactly. I look at a case and decide if I think it has merit, because attorneys don't. Some of them try to do this on their own. They don't know medicine. They know a little bit. They learn a lot as they go along. A good malpractice attorney knows a lot about medicine because each time they have a case, they have to research it because they need to know it. So, but they don't have that understanding necessarily, and they don't have the provider, they haven't actually practiced, right? That practice, and that goes back to why it's so important to have some experience, and you can't do this right out of school or in the first couple of years. You need to have that experience. You need to know how the hospital flows. You need to know how things work and how the thought process goes, because you'll look at a record and you'll say, as a provider, and that's why I can do it for a PA or a physician for the most part. Again, I'm not an expert in everything, and I'm not going to be an expert against a physician, but I know the thought process that goes behind this. The potassium came back and it was high, and that what should have been done and what the thought process was if they didn't do this, or, so the thought process of it. And we all practice the same standard of care. Like I said before, we should be. PAs, nurse practitioners, and MDs, we're all working side by side. We're all doing the same job, and we're all practicing the same standard of care. So you know what to do in a case. And then if you think it has legs, you tell the attorney, you talk through it with them and say, I think, you should have an expert look at this, and this is why.
Right.
Or I don't think this has merit, and this is why. And it's up to them. At the end of the day, it's up to the attorney. You're not making the final decision. Attorneys have different risk profiles as to what they'll accept, because these cases are very expensive to litigate.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure. I can't even imagine. But I think it's really interesting, like just you explaining kind of how you segmented from expert witness work into like doing something more broad. And now, of course, this is like your full-time thing. This is really cool for, I think, PAs to recognize, hey, this is a potential non-clinical transition in the future if like you have an appetite for it.
Yeah.
I think most PAs like don't have the recognition early on. You talk to a 26, 28-year-old PA, they're like, yeah, I love medicine. I'm doing it till I drop dead. But it's like once you've been here a couple decades, you might realize like, hey, I'm not going to be doing this clinical job until I'm 65 or 67, but I might want to use my skills, And so like this is a perfect example of using the 7 habits of highly effective people, like begin with the end in mind. Because if you're listening and you're like, oh, I really like what she's doing here, I could see myself working in the medical legal space full time. Well, then doing expert witness stuff while you're a clinician is beautiful. Right? It's no different than if you're like, oh, I think I might love to be a medical science liaison. Maybe I should get a job as a speaker to gain that experience in industry. Mm-hmm. Like there are these side hustles that can just really pad your CV and prepare you for a non-clinical transition if you just start thinking early of like, what would be a good next step for me?
Exactly.
I was literally talking to a new PA like this past week who was like 26 or something, was like, I don't ever see myself giving up medicine. Like, how long have you been a PA? Like, 18 months. It's like, okay.
You know what? I'm glad to hear that, because if after 18 months you were like, I need out, then you'd be like, okay, that's terrible. We're like, because you go through so much intense education, spend all this money on school to get out and be like, I can't do this the rest of my life. Heck no. Yeah. I mean, I was in a position where I thought I'll just go back and become something else. I even considered law school, but then the thought of like having to go through another 3 years of an, intense education, I was like, no, thank you. And the cost of it. But I was like, maybe I'll become an interior designer or a photographer or something fun. But then you realize
fun, as opposed to medicine.
But then you think about it and you're like, all right, let's be realistic. I mean, at this point in my life, I've reached a certain threshold of income that I'm accustomed to start all over at the bottom is not something I want to do. And I've also accumulated all of this knowledge and experience in one area that I should be able to transfer to something else. And this was like a perfect transfer. I have all of this experience and education that I can help in a different arena and help attorneys understand. And for the most part, we've just talked about malpractice cases, but there are other areas that you can make money in this arena. To be an expert witness, you have to be able to withstand a deposition and potentially go to trial. You can't be the expert and then say, but I don't go to trial. If you are the expert, you go the distance. Mm-hmm. And that means that you might have to stand on the stand in front of the jury and the judge, in front of the PA that would be sitting at that table who you are saying was negligent potentially. And you have to be able to say that. And that's not easy for some people. So if that's something you're thinking, this is not for me because I couldn't do that. I could do the behind the scenes, I could review the records, and I can do all that, but I couldn't get up there or go on record in a deposition and say that, the PA did something wrong, or I have anxiety, social anxiety. I couldn't do that. There are still other ways you can do this kind of work. Like I said, the stuff that I do, a lot of it is behind the scenes where I would never testify. And a lot of some of the other work I do is personal injury work. So that doesn't involve testifying in that it can if you're the expert on that case, but that's a whole other thing. But anyway, simply reviewing records, if you have like a pain management or an orthopedic background or even an emergency medicine background, if you have some type of or neurosurgery to do PI work, accidents happen all the time. I'm sure anyone right now that's listening could name about 5 different personal injury attorneys in their town. These cases are all over the place. People are constantly getting in accidents, slip and falls, that kind of stuff. So any of those cases, anything that involves a medical record, you can help on. So I've done personal injury cases where I review the records and I basically break down the injuries, what happened, what their pre-existing injuries were, what might happen in the future based on these injuries, and then kind of help them explain to them and help them understand how those injuries are going to affect the person's life now and potentially in the future. What was old and they had that before. That's not related. Mechanism of injury. So those are all things that you can do. And that's behind the scenes stuff. You're just writing a report. You can do chronologies where you are just literally going through the records and making a chronology of the medical events. And that's a behind the scenes kind of a thing. So there are other options. I mean, there are people that you can do. You can be a fact witness if you don't want to speak about the standard of care of a PA because you don't feel comfortable with it, or there are fact witnesses that go to court and you're really just there to explain something. So the jury needs to understand, think about patients, right? You have to explain to a patient something that's going on and explain to them in a way that they'll understand. And that's pretty much the same thing of explaining to a jury. So they use medical professionals, nurses, physicians, PAs can certainly do it to explain a certain concept or medical disease process to a jury. So if that's something that sounds interesting, you can look into doing that. I mean, there's so many different avenues.
I think about 20% of people listening just breathed a huge sigh of relief. Like, oh, there's other options for me. Because being an expert witness, I was a little nervous when you were describing a trial or a deposition. So that's so reassuring to hear that there are other options that might feel a little bit more behind the scenes, or even like a fact witness. I had no idea that was a thing. But of course, if you've spent years explaining congestive heart failure to patients, you can, of course, explain that to a jury. That's really cool. Do you go about it the same way to try to find those types of positions?
Yeah. So I would say those are, probably a little bit harder. I mean, you've got to create the path. I will say nurses have been doing this for decades. So, to have a nurse explain something like that is probably fine in court, but to actually have, and the reason they're not having physicians do it necessarily is because physicians cost more. So if you could have a PA come in and explain, you're basically saying this is a person that understands, they practice medicine, they know this is the process of it. I think attorneys like the idea of having a PA do it. So you just have to put yourself out there and know what you want to do and know what you can do. And then you've got to let people know that you exist is essentially it. I mean, start simple. If it's something that you want to do, you can go locally. I did this when I started. I went to personal injury attorneys locally and just dropped information off and let them know what I did and what I could do. Same thing if you want to be a fact witness. A lot of cases, like criminal cases, if you have a sexual assault kind of background, of people who have been involved in, sexual assault, sane stuff in an ER or something like that, you can talk to attorneys that do sexual assault, like criminal attorneys. I do some work sometimes with a DUI attorney who will send me stuff that says, he'll be like, person DUI, went to the hospital. These are the results of their blood work. Do you see anything that looks on here that, there's anything else that could have been going on? So we know, right, were they diabetic? What was their blood sugar? So those kinds of stuff and review things. Those cases are usually, there might be criminal defense attorneys that are looking for someone, or prosecutors. I will say if you are working for a prosecutor or state, they're not going to pay you top dollar because they just don't have the budget. Right. But they're going to pay you more than what you make as a PA.
Touche. Touche. Well, this has been awesome. Thank you so much. You know so much about this space. You have done so much in this space. It is nice to hear from a PA who is actually walking the walk, not just, hey, this is possible, but also watch me because I've done it.
Yeah, I did do so much research because I just couldn't find the information or the education of how to get to where I wanted to be. I knew where I wanted to be, but I didn't know how to get there. So I had to do all of this research. And I feel like when I first started, I was like, I'm going to keep this all to myself. It's my own, it's my secret. This is amazing. And I encountered so many people that were expert witnesses, and there are PAs out there that are expert witnesses. And I will mention, APOM, if you are looking to be an expert witness, join APOM. That is part of it. We do a lot of risk management and liability education, but, we get attorneys that are looking for experts, and we pass that along to our members. So if you're interested, it's a good place to start in APALM. But that was, it's expert witness stuff. The stuff I wanted to do was more like I was talking about, behind the scenes kind of stuff, and I couldn't find that. So I just did all this research, and I want to share it with as many PAs as I can, because I see so many nurses in this space, and I hear attorneys tell me, oh, wow, I didn't realize PAs did this, or could be doing this. And they understand what we do. You don't have to explain what you do, what a PA does. They know, and they are intrigued by the fact that they could have a PA do it instead of a nurse, or pay a physician expert to do it. So it's just about getting yourself out there. I've done all this research. Where I've told you, like Kristen, I'm looking to put together a course. Yeah. I'm working on putting together a course on how to become an expert witness, and then eventually another course about how to basically do what I do, which is how to start your own medical legal consulting business where you work full-time as your full-time job without having to be clinically practicing if you don't want to.
So cool. Susan, where should they go to reach out to you if they want to learn more or connect with you so they can be poised to learn from you again in the future?
Yeah, so you can go to my website. It's medlawpa.com. So medlawpa.com. I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me, Susan Ferrero.
With an optimized profile, I'm sure.
Yes. Yeah. Reach out to me on LinkedIn, reach out to me. You can, my email address is on my website. You send me an email. I get PAs that send me messages on a weekly basis, asking me and telling me that if they can ask me some questions, they see other interviews I've done, or they see me on LinkedIn or something. And I try to share as much. I haven't posted on LinkedIn in a while, but I try to share as much as information as I can with them so that they don't have to reinvent the wheel, and all the information. That's why putting together a course I'm terribly excited about. It's going to help people so much, PAs that are looking to get into this space.
I agree completely. Thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge with us. I know a whole bunch of people are going to be reaching out to you for more after this. So we appreciate your time.
Yeah, I love it.
Thanks, Susan.
Thanks, Kristen.